The neon lights of Kepler Station flickered overhead as Hana Kim dragged her exhausted body through another endless shift at the Stellar Diner. The smell of recycled air and burnt grease had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. Her reflection in the grimy window showed dark circles under her eyes and hair that hadn't seen a proper wash in 3 days. The uniform that once fit her perfectly now hung loose on her shrinking frame. She pulled the crumpled credits from her apron, pocket and counted them again, hoping somehow the numbers would magically increase. 47 credits. Jimin's medication alone cost 200, and that was just for 1 week. Her younger brother had been getting sicker, and the doctors on this outer rim station couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. Every night she watched him writhe in pain, his fever spiking as his body fought against something they couldn't identify. The diner's ancient cleaning bot had broken down months ago, leaving Hana to scrub every surface by hand. She wiped down table 7 for the 4th time, her cloth coming away black with the residue that seemed to accumulate faster than she could clean it. The other waitress had called in sick again, leaving Hana to handle the entire evening rush alone. Outside the viewport, massive cargo ships drifted past like sleeping giants, their running lights cutting through the darkness of space. Kepler Station sat at the crossroads of 3 major shipping lanes, making it a perfect stop for travelers, smugglers, and businessmen alike. Most of them treated the station's workers like invisible servants, barely acknowledging their existence. The entrance chime rang out with its familiar off-key note. Hana looked up from her cleaning to see a figure silhouetted against the bright corridor lights. Even before he stepped fully into the diner, she knew this wasn't a typical customer. His coat was made from real fabric, not the synthetic materials everyone else wore. The cut was perfect, expensive, and completely out of place in her dingy establishment. As he moved into the light, Hana's breath caught in her throat. Kang Daeho, the man who owned half the galaxy's shipping routes, whose face appeared on financial news broadcasts across human space. What was someone like him doing in a place like this? 3 men in matching dark suits remained in the corridor, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. Security guards, she realized. Real ones, not the retired miners who usually handled station security. These men looked military, disciplined, dangerous. Kang slid into the corner booth, the one with the best view of both the entrance and the viewport. His movements were fluid, controlled, like a predator choosing the perfect hunting spot. He didn't look around the diner with disgust like most wealthy visitors. Instead, his steel-grey eyes seemed to catalogue every detail, every person, every potential exit. The tablet in his hands displayed scrolling columns of numbers and star charts. Even from across the room, Hana could see it wasn't standard civilian technology. The display flickered with information that looked like ship movements, supply chains, maybe even military positions. She grabbed the coffee pot with shaking hands and approached his table. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his black hair. He was older than he appeared in the holo broadcasts, maybe 50, with the kind of quiet intensity that made people step aside when he walked past. "Coffee black," he said without looking up from his tablet. His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Hana tried to keep her hands steady as she lifted the pot. This was Kang Daeho, the man who could buy and sell entire star systems, the man whose company employed millions of people across the galaxy. And here he was, sitting in her pathetic little diner, trusting her not to spill coffee all over his expensive clothes. Of course, that was exactly what happened. The hot liquid arced through the air in slow motion, splashing across his pristine coat and spreading across the table's surface. The rich brown stain soaked into fabric that probably cost more than she made in a year. "I'm so sorry, sir." The words tumbled out as she grabbed napkins and started dabbing frantically at the mess. "Please, I can pay for cleaning, I can—" As she reached across the table, her elbow knocked against his jacket. His wallet slipped from an inner pocket, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Credit chips scattered across the grimy tiles along with identification cards and what looked like access keys to very expensive places. But it was the photograph that made her freeze. A woman in a white lab coat smiled up at her from the faded image. The face was older, more mature, but the eyes were identical to the ones Hannah saw in the mirror every morning. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin, the same gentle smile that had once tucked her into bed every night. Her mother, Dr. Lee Minji, who had died in a research accident when Hannah was 12 years old. The diner seemed to fade around. Her, the constant hum of the station's life support systems, the distant conversations of other customers, the smell of burnt coffee, all of it disappeared. There was only the photograph and the impossible questions it raised. Why do you have my mother's picture? The words came out as barely a whisper, lost in the ambient noise of the diner. But Kang Daeho heard them. His tablet went dark as he slowly raised his head, those piercing grey eyes focusing on her face for the first time. She saw something there, buried beneath the businessman's mask. Recognition, pain, and something that might have been hope. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets that had been kept for far too long. Because she saved us all. Hannah's legs felt like rubber as she followed Kang through the station's main corridor. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but the words stuck in her throat. The security guards flanked them, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds of dock workers and travelers. Nobody seemed to notice them, but Hannah felt like everyone was staring. The docking bay was massive, filled with ships of every size and shape. Cargo haulers sat next to passenger liners, their hulls scarred from countless jumps through hyperspace, but Kang's ship stood apart from the rest. The celestial dawn was sleek and black, its surface absorbing light like liquid metal. No visible weapons, but something about its design screamed danger. "She's beautiful," Hannah whispered as they approached the boarding ramp. "She's fast," Kang replied. "Sometimes that's more important than beautiful." The ship's interior was nothing like the cramped spaces Hannah was used to. Rich leather seats surrounded a central table, made from what looked like genuine earthwood. The walls curved smoothly, embedded with displays that showed the ship's status in soft blue light. Everything was clean, expensive, and completely alien to her world of broken equipment and recycled air. But it was the holographic projector in the center of the room that took her breath away. As they entered, it activated automatically, filling the space with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Stars pulsed in different colors, connected by lines that showed shipping routes and hyperspace lanes. Red markers indicated human colonies, while other symbols represented alien territories she'd never seen on civilian maps. "Sit," Kang said, gesturing to one of the chairs. His voice was gentler now, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about the galaxy." Hannah settled into the chair, its surface molding to her body. The hologram shifted, zooming in on a sector she recognized as human space. But there were things here that weren't on any public star chart. Military installations, hidden bases, weapon platforms disguised as mining stations. "Your mother wasn't just a scientist," Kang began, his fingers dancing across a control panel. "She was the most brilliant xenobiologist humanity ever produced, and she was the woman I loved." The hologram changed, showing a laboratory filled with advanced equipment. Hannah gasped as she saw her mother's face, younger but unmistakable, working alongside a man she now recognized as Kang. They moved together like dancers, completing each other's thoughts, sharing the kind of partnership that went beyond professional. Collaboration. "We were studying alien life forms, trying to understand how other species had evolved," Kang continued. "The Terran Council wanted to know if we were alone in developing intelligence, or if there were patterns we could learn from. What we found was far worse than anything we'd imagined." The display shifted to show microscopic organisms, writhing and pulsing with an alien intelligence that made Hannah's skin crawl. They moved with purpose, seeking out specific targets with the precision of guided missiles. "The hegemony," Kang said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. 6 species that have ruled the galaxy for over 50,000 years. They've watched civilizations rise and fall, always staying in the shadows, always pulling the strings. And they have a very simple policy for dealing with species that might threaten their power. More images flashed across the hologram. Worlds that had once been green and blue, now grey and lifeless. civilizations that had reached for the stars, only to find empty cities and silent communications arrays. They don't invade, Kang explained. They don't conquer. They simply release engineered pathogens that target specific genetic markers. The species dies out slowly, naturally, as if they'd simply failed to adapt to their environment. 17 intelligent species in the last 10,000 years, all extinct, all forgotten. Hana's hands gripped the chair arms so tightly, her knuckles went white. And humans were next. The hologram showed Earth, then the growing network of human colonies spreading across the galaxy. The pathogen was already in our systems, released 20 years ago through contaminated supplies on frontier worlds. By the time your mother and I discovered it, millions of people had already been exposed. The microscopic view returned, but now Hana could see the pathogen's true purpose. It attacked reproductive cells, slowly degrading fertility rates across entire populations. Within 2 generations, human births would drop to 0. The species would die out, leaving behind empty worlds for the hegemony to claim. But Mother found a cure, Hana said, her voice barely audible. Kang's expression darkened. She found something better. Your mother didn't just create a cure, she created a weapon. The same genetic markers that made humans vulnerable to the pathogen could be turned around, used to make us immune to almost any biological attack. He gestured, and the hologram showed DNA sequences spinning in the air between them. But it required a specific genetic template, someone with the right combination of markers to serve as a foundation for the immunity system. Hana stared at the sequences, recognizing patterns that looked familiar. These look like your genetic profile, Kang finished. Your mother used her own DNA as the base template. But she knew the hegemony would target her once they realized what she'd done. So she hid the research, scattered it across dozens of secure locations, and made sure the most important component would survive. Me, Hana whispered. You and your brother. The next generation, carrying the immunity in your blood. Kang's voice grew heavy with old pain. She was murdered 3 days after completing the cure, made to look like a lab accident, but I knew better. The hegemony had discovered her work. The hologram shifted again, showing a massive explosion tearing through a research facility. Hana watched her mother's laboratory, her mother's life's work, disappear in a ball of fire and twisted metal. They thought they'd won, Kang continued. They thought they'd eliminated the threat. But your mother had already given me everything I needed to build humanity's defense. The cure, the immunity boosters, the genetic templates, everything except the one thing that could make it work on a galactic scale. What's that? Kang's steel-gray eyes met hers. A living carrier, someone whose blood contains the active immunity factors, someone who could produce the cure in quantities large enough to save our entire species. The ship's systems hummed quietly around them as the truth settled over Hana like a heavy blanket. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She'd been murdered by aliens who wanted to wipe out humanity. And now, 20 years later, Hana was the key to stopping them. Your brother's illness, Kang said softly. It's not a disease. It's his body naturally developing the immunity your mother designed. His genetics are evolving in real time, preparing him for a war he doesn't even know is coming. Hana thought of Jimin, writhing in pain as his fever spiked. His body fighting against something that wasn't trying to kill him, but to save him. The hegemony is coming, Kang said. Our intelligence networks have detected massive fleet movements in their territory. They know we've been preparing, and they're not going to wait for us to get stronger. Outside the ship's viewports, the lights of Kepler Station twinkled peacefully. Cargo ships moved through their docking patterns, completely unaware that a war for the survival of their species was about to begin. What do you need from me? Hana asked. Kang smiled for the first time since she'd met him. It was a sad smile, but it carried hope. I need you to help me finish what your mother started. I need you to help me save humanity. The holographic display exploded into life, filling the cabin with a 3-dimensional map that made Hana's head spin. What she had thought was empty space between star systems suddenly crawled with activity. Hidden stations floated in the darkness, their locations marked by pulsing darts of light. Massive construction yards hung in the shadows of dead planets, building something that definitely wasn't civilian cargo ships. "This is impossible," Hana breathed, watching as the display zoomed in on a seemingly empty asteroid field. The rocks parted like a curtain, revealing a shipyard larger than any city she'd ever seen. Hundreds of vessels in various stages of construction filled the space, their hulls bristling with weapons that looked nothing like anything in the public databases. Kang's fingers danced across the control panel, and the view shifted to show a mining operation on a barren world. But the miners weren't digging for ore. They were extracting something that glowed with an inner light, something that made the air around it shimmer like heated glass. "Quantum metal," Kang explained. "The only substance that can hold a quantum field stable long enough for our new weapons to work. The hegemony thinks we're still using chemical explosives and magnetic railguns. They have no idea we've been developing technology that shouldn't exist for another 1,000 years. The display changed again, showing what looked like a normal trade convoy moving between systems. But as Hana watched, the cargo ship suddenly unfolded like metal flowers, revealing gun batteries and missile pods hidden within their hulls. The transformation took less than 30 seconds, turning harmless merchants into warships that could level a city. "Every major shipping company in human space is part of the network," Kang said. "Every colony governor, every military commander, every scientist working on civilian projects. We've been building an army right under the hegemony's noses for 20 years. Hana felt dizzy trying to process the scale of it all. "But how did you keep it secret? Something this big, this many?" "People, because your mother taught us something important about the hegemony," Kang replied. "They're arrogant. They've been the dominant power for so long that they can't imagine a younger species could threaten them. They see us as children playing with toys, not warriors preparing for battle." The hologram shifted to show alien ships, sleek and beautiful, in a way that human vessels could never match. They moved through space like living creatures, their hulls flowing and changing shape as they flew. But there was something cold about them, something that spoke of intelligence without warmth, of power without mercy. "They've eliminated 17 species over the last 10,000 years, Kang continued, his voice growing hard. "Always the same pattern. Let the species develop, let them spread across multiple worlds, then release the pathogen and watch them die out slowly. Clean, efficient, and it leaves all the infrastructure intact for them to use." More images flashed across the display. Worlds that had once been home to thriving civilizations, now empty and waiting. Cities that had been built by hands that no longer existed, their creators reduced to dust by engineered diseases. "But they made a mistake with humans," Kang said, and Hana could hear the anger building in his voice. "They assumed we'd react, like the others, that we'd accept extinction quietly, that we'd fade away without a fight. They didn't understand what makes us different." The display changed to show Earth's history, flashing through centuries of warfare, exploration, and stubborn survival. Humans climbing out of caves, building cities, reaching for the stars despite every obstacle the universe threw at them. "We don't just adapt," Kang said. "We learn, we plan, and when someone tries to wipe us out, we get very, very angry." A new section of the map opened up, showing ship formations that made Hana's breath catch. Not hundreds of vessels, but thousands. Entire fleets hidden in the dark spaces between stars, waiting for orders that would bring them screaming out of the void. "The Titan-class battleships," Kang explained as the display focused on vessels that dwarfed anything Hana had ever imagined. "Each one carries enough firepower to crack a moon. We've got 47 of them, built in secret shipyards that officially don't exist." But it was the smaller ships that truly impressed her. Fighters that could cloak themselves from sensors, bombers that could punch through energy shields like they were paper, and something called ghost ships that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. "Quantum phase technology," Kang said, noticing her stare. "They can shift partially out of normal space, making them nearly impossible to target. The hegemony's weapons can't lock onto something that's only half there." The hologram zoomed in on Kepler Station, and Hana was shocked to see hidden weapon platforms built into the station's structure. What she had thought were communication arrays were actually massive railguns. The cargo bays concealed fighter squadrons. Even the diner where she worked sat on top of a command center that could coordinate fleet movements across 3 sectors. "Your brother's condition," Kang said, his voice softening. "It's not an illness. His body is doing exactly what your mother designed it to do. The immunity system is integrating with his natural genetics, making him resistant to any biological weapon the hegemony might use." Hannah thought of Jimin, sweating and shaking as his fever spiked night after night. "He's in pain because he's evolving?" "The process is rough on the first generation," Kang admitted, "but once it's complete, he'll be immune to almost anything they can throw at us. And his children will be born with the immunity already active." The display shifted to show genetic models that looked like complex crystalline structures. Each one was slightly different, but they all shared the same basic pattern that Hannah recognized from her own DNA analysis. "The immunity spreads through families," Kang explained. "Your mother's research showed that parents with the active genes would pass enhanced versions to their children. Within 3 generations, the entire human species would be immune to biological warfare." "But the hegemony won't just sit back and watch that happen," Hannah said. "No, they won't." Kang's expression grew grim. "Our intelligence networks picked up massive fleet movements 6 months ago. They're coming, Hannah. The full might of 6 species that have ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. They're not going to make the same mistake twice." The hologram showed alien formations moving through deep space, their numbers so vast they looked like swarms of insects. But these insects were the size of cities, armed with weapons that could sterilize entire worlds. "How long do we have?" Hannah asked. "Based on their current trajectory, they'll reach human space in 72 hours, Kang replied. "But they won't attack the core worlds first. They'll start with the outer colonies, the places where they can test their new weapons without risking retaliation. Places like Kepler Station," Hannah whispered. "Places exactly like Kepler Station." Kang's hands moved across the controls, and the hologram zoomed out to show the strategic importance of their location. 3 major trade routes converge here. If they can take this station, they can cut off supply lines to a dozen colony worlds. The display changed one final time, showing something that made Hannah's heart race. Hidden in the asteroid field beyond, the station, massive ships were powering up their engines. Human ships, sleek and deadly, emerging from concealment like predators waking from sleep. "The hegemony thinks they're hunting prey," Kang said, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the light from the hologram. "They're about to learn that they've walked into a trap that's been 20 years in the making." Outside the viewport, Kepler Station continued its peaceful routine, but Hannah could now see the truth hidden beneath the surface. The loading docks that were actually weapon platforms, the cargo ships that were actually warships, the miners and traders who were actually soldiers waiting for the order to fight. "Your mother's death wasn't the end," Kang said quietly. "It was the beginning of humanity's war for survival, and now it's time to show the galaxy what happens when you try to make humans extinct." The first thing Hannah noticed wasn't the sound of alarms, but the way the ship's light suddenly shifted from warm white to blood red. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson as warning sirens wailed throughout the celestial dawn. The holographic display flickered and changed, showing real-time tactical information that made her stomach drop. Space around Kepler Station had become a nightmare. Massive shapes materialized out of nowhere, their hulls shimmering like liquid mercury as they dropped out of hyperspace. The alien vessels were beautiful in the most terrifying way possible. They moved like living creatures, their surfaces flowing and rippling as internal systems adjusted to normal space. Some were shaped like enormous jellyfish, their translucent bodies pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Others resembled massive insects, all curves and organic angles that hurt to look at directly. "Hegemony fleet, full deployment," Kang's voice was ice cold as his fingers flew across the control panel. 600 ships, maybe more. They're not taking any chances this time. Through the viewport, Hannah watched as the station's defensive systems came online. What had looked like communication arrays suddenly revealed themselves as massive railgun batteries. Cargo platforms split open to release squadrons of fighters that had been hidden inside fake shipping containers. The mining ships in the outer system shed their disguises, unfolding into warships bristling with weapons, but the alien response was swift and brutal. The jellyfish-shaped vessels extended long, tentacle-like appendages that began to glow with an inner light. When they fired, the weapons didn't look like anything Hana had ever seen. Instead of laser beams or missiles, they released clouds of shimmering particles that drifted through space like glowing fog. Biological weapons, Kang explained grimly. Engineered viruses wrapped in quantum fields. They pass right through energy shields and armor plating. Nothing can stop them except natural immunity. On the tactical display, Hana watched human ships trying to avoid the deadly clouds. Some succeeded, using their superior speed and maneuverability to stay clear of the worst concentrations. But others weren't so lucky. As the shimmering particles touched their hulls, something terrible began to happen. The ships didn't explode. They just stopped. Their engines went dark, their weapons fell silent, and they began to drift helplessly through space. Through the enhanced sensors, Hana could see the crews inside, collapsing at their stations as the bioweapons did their work. "They're targeting specific genetic markers," Kang said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Not random attacks. They know exactly which ships have crew members carrying your mother's immunity genes." More alien vessels appeared. These ones shaped like enormous spiders with crystalline bodies that refracted starlight into rainbow patterns. They moved with mechanical precision, their multiple limbs reaching out to grab the disabled human ships. But instead of destroying them, they began to drain something from the vessel's life support systems. "They're collecting samples," Kang realized, "trying to reverse engineer the immunity before we can deploy it galaxy-wide." The celestial dawn shuddered as something massive passed nearby. Through the viewport, Hana saw the largest alien ship she could have imagined. It was easily the size of a small moon, its surface covered in what looked like organic towers and spires. Patterns of light raced across its hull like neural networks firing in a vast alien brain. "Command vessel," Kang whispered. "I've never seen one this close to human space before." As if responding to his words, the massive ship began to change. The towers on its surface realigned themselves, focusing on specific targets throughout the system. When it fired, the weapon was nothing like the biological clouds used by the smaller ships. This was pure energy, a beam of coherent light that could slice through planetary crusts like a knife through paper. The beam lanced out toward New Brisbane, a mining colony on the system's 4th planet. Hana watched in horror as the energy struck the planet's surface, carving a canyon hundreds of kilometers long in a matter of seconds. But the beam wasn't designed to destroy the world. Instead, it released something into the planet's atmosphere, something that began to spread like a viral infection through the air itself. "They're not just trying to kill us," Hana said, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "They're testing new weapons." "Every species they've eliminated has taught them something new," Kang confirmed. "Humans are just their latest laboratory." The tactical display suddenly exploded with new contacts as hidden human fleets decloaked throughout the system. Ships emerged from asteroid belts, from the shadows of dead moons, from hiding places that had been prepared for decades. The trap that had been 20 years in the making finally revealed itself. But even with all their preparation, the humans were still outnumbered 3-1. Hana watched a squadron of human fighters engage one of the spider ships. Their quantum phase technology made them flicker in and out of existence, but the aliens adapted quickly. The spider's crystalline limbs began to emit some kind of field that forced the human ships back into normal space, making them vulnerable to the creatures. "Weapons! We're losing," she said. "Not yet," Kang replied, but she could hear the doubt in his voice. "But we need to deploy the immunity system now before they can develop countermeasures." He held out a medical scanner, its surface gleaming with technology that looked years ahead of anything she'd seen in civilian hospitals. "This will extract the genetic template from your blood and transmit it to every human ship in the system. But it's not without risk." "What kind of risk?" "The process will mark you as a priority target. Every alien ship out there will focus on destroying this vessel once they detect what we're doing." Kang's steel-gray eyes met hers. Your mother never had the choice to walk away. The hegemony found her before she could deploy the immunity on a large scale. But you can still say no. Through the viewport, Hannah could see the lights of Kepler Station flickering as the alien bioweapons began to affect its population. Her brother was somewhere in that chaos, probably wondering why the sirens were screaming and why the artificial gravity kept fluctuating. "What about Jimin?" she asked. "His body has been preparing for this war his entire life," Kang said softly. "The immunity is already active in his system. He's one of the few people who could survive direct exposure to their weapons." On the tactical display, another human ship went dark as alien bioweapons overwhelmed its crew. But this time Hannah noticed something different. The ship's medical bay was still showing life signs. Not many, but some of the crew were still alive. Despite being exposed to weapons that should have killed them instantly, they have immunity genes too, she realized. "Your mother's research didn't just save her own family," Kang confirmed. She identified dozens of genetic lines that carried natural resistance. But those people don't know what they are. They don't know why they're surviving when others aren't. More alien ships were arriving every minute, their forms becoming stranger and more terrifying. Some looked like enormous flowers made of metal and crystal, their petals opening to release swarms of smaller craft. Others resembled deep-sea creatures scaled up to impossible sizes, all tentacles and bioluminescent lures, but it was the way they coordinated their attacks that truly frightened Hannah. They moved like parts of a single organism, responding to threats with the kind of precision that only came from shared consciousness. The hegemony wasn't just 6 species working together. They were something far more dangerous. "They're a hive mind," she whispered. "Parts of one anyway," Kang agreed. "That's how they've stayed in power for so long. Individual species rise and fall, but the collective memory survives." The medical scanner felt warm in her hands, its weight somehow both light and incredibly heavy at the same time. Through its surface, she could see genetic sequences scrolling past, patterns that matched the immunity codes her mother had died to protect. "If I do this," Hannah said, "how many people will it save?" "Everyone," Kang replied simply. "Every human in the galaxy, and their children and their children's children. The immunity will spread through the population naturally once it's activated." Another alien weapon struck the station, and this time Hannah could see people collapsing in the corridors. But some were still standing, still fighting, their bodies somehow resistant to weapons designed to kill entire species. She thought of her mother, working in secret to save a species that didn't even know it was in danger. She thought of Jimin, enduring years of pain as his body prepared for a war he'd never asked to fight. She thought of all the human worlds out there, all the families who were about to face extinction unless someone made the hard choice. Hannah pressed her thumb to the scanner's activation surface. "Then let's show them what humans do when they're pushed too far." The scanner hummed to life, and somewhere in the depths of space the real war began. The scanner's hum grew louder as Hannah's genetic information flowed through the ship's quantum communication array. Within seconds, the data was racing across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, carried by networks that had been secretly built into every human communications satellite, every trade beacon, every deep space relay station. On Kepler Station, Jimin collapsed to his knees as his body suddenly stopped fighting itself. The fever that had racked him for months disappeared in an instant, replaced by a feeling of strength he'd never experienced before. Around him, other people who had been dying from the alien bioweapons suddenly stood up, their bodies adapting in real time to threats that should have killed them. The transformation wasn't limited to the station. Across human space, emergency. Broadcasts began transmitting on every frequency. The message was simple but revolutionary. Humanity was no longer defenseless. The immunity was spreading from person to person through the air itself, carried by engineered viruses that worked faster than anything the hegemony had ever encountered. "It's working," Kang breathed, watching the tactical display as human ships that had gone dark suddenly came back online. Their crews, thought dead minutes before, were returning to their stations with newfound immunity flowing through their veins. But the real surprise came from the hidden fleets. Throughout the galaxy, what the hegemony had dismissed as ordinary cargo ships began to shed their disguises. Massive shipping containers split open like metallic flowers, revealing weapon systems that blazed to life with quantum fire. Mining vessels that had spent decades harvesting asteroids suddenly deployed gun batteries that had been hidden inside. Their industrial equipment. The spider-shaped alien ships found themselves surrounded by human fighters that seemed to appear out of nowhere. These weren't the clumsy, primitive vessels the hegemony expected. They moved with deadly grace, their quantum phase drives allowing them to strike from impossible angles before vanishing back into folded space. "Target the neural networks," Kang commanded, his voice carrying across the human fleet through encrypted channels. "Hit their coordination centers first." The alien vessels, which had moved with perfect synchronization just minutes before, suddenly began to falter. Their hive-mind connection was being disrupted by human weapons, specifically designed to interfere with their shared consciousness. Individual ships found themselves isolated, cut off from the collective intelligence that had made them so dangerous. One of the jellyfish-shaped command vessels tried to retreat, its translucent body pulsing with distress signals. But a squadron of human destroyers had been waiting in the asteroid belt, their hulls coated with stealth materials that made them invisible to alien sensors. They struck the fleeing ship with coordinated precision, their quantum torpedoes tearing through bioarmor that had protected the hegemony for millennia. "Impossible," came a transmission from the massive, moon-sized command ship. The voice was a mixture of 6 different alien languages, translated by the ship's computers into something humans could understand. "Your species was marked for extinction. The pathogen should have sterilized your entire population." Hannah stepped forward, taking the communication controls from Kang. When she spoke, her voice was broadcast not just to the alien fleet, but to every human ship in the system and beyond. "My mother, Dr. Lee Minji, figured out your plan 20 years ago," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "She turned your own weapon against you. Every human in the galaxy is now immune to your bioweapons. But more than that, we're carriers of something you've never encountered before." As if to prove her point, the immunity system began to spread to other species. The Zalari merchants who traded with humans found their natural resistance to disease suddenly enhanced, beyond anything they'd experienced. The Corvan mining crews discovered they could survive in toxic environments that should have killed them instantly. "You made one critical mistake," Hannah continued, watching as more alien ships began to malfunction. "You assumed we were like the other 17 species you destroyed. You thought we'd go quietly, that we'd accept extinction without a fight." The holographic display showed human fleets emerging from hiding places throughout the galaxy. They rose from gas-giant atmospheres where they'd been concealed for decades. They decloaked from positions near black holes where their energy signatures had been masked by gravitational distortions. They appeared from inside hollow asteroids, from abandoned space stations, from the dark side of airless moons. "But humans don't surrender," Kang added, taking his place beside Hannah. "We adapt, we overcome, and when someone tries to wipe us out, we make sure they regret it." The tide of battle was turning rapidly. Human ships that had seemed hopelessly outnumbered were now revealing their true capabilities. The quantum weapons that shouldn't have existed for another 1,000 years were tearing through alien defenses like paper. Stealth technology made entire fleets appear and disappear at will, and the immunity system was spreading faster than the aliens could adapt to it. But the most devastating weapon wasn't technological at all. As news of the hegemony's genocide spread through the galaxy's communication networks, other species began to understand the truth. The Altarians, who had always wondered why their sister colonies had gone silent, learned they'd been murdered by engineered plagues. The Zenthari discovered that their population decline wasn't natural evolution, but deliberate biological warfare. One by one, species that had lived in fear of the mysterious cosmic cycles that seemed to claim civilizations began to join humanity's cause. They brought their own fleets, their own weapons, their own burning desire for revenge against the creatures who had been secretly controlling the galaxy for 50,000 years. The massive command ship tried to make one final attack, its organic, towers focusing every weapon on the celestial dawn. But human ships swarmed around it like angry insects, their combined firepower overwhelming even its massive defenses. The creature ship's bioarmor began to crack and split, revealing the soft, vulnerable flesh beneath. "We surrender," came the alien transmission, its multiple voices now filled with something that might have been fear. "We offer terms for peaceful withdrawal from your territory." Hana looked at the photograph of her mother, then at the tactical display showing human ships throughout the galaxy. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for justice, for all the species that had been quietly murdered. While the galaxy looked the other way. "There are no terms," she said simply. "You had 50,000 years to choose peace. You chose genocide instead." The final battle lasted 3 more hours. When it was over, the hegemony's ancient empire lay in ruins. Their command ships were captured or destroyed. Their bioweapon production facilities were in human hands. And across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for millennia were finally free to choose their own destinies. Standing on the bridge of what had once been the enemy's flagship, Hana held her mother's photograph up to the starlight streaming. Through the viewport, Dr. Lee Minji's smile seemed brighter somehow, as if she knew that her sacrifice had led to something far greater than just humanity's survival. "She would have been proud," Kang said softly. "She knew," Hana replied, watching as human ships began the long work of rebuilding a galaxy that was finally free. "Somehow, I think she always knew we'd win." Outside, the stars seemed to shine brighter, no longer overshadowed by the ancient tyranny that had ruled them for so long. Humanity had not just survived their intended extinction, they had broken the chains that had bound the galaxy for millennia, proving once and for all that some species are simply too stubborn to die quietly. The sea, age of the hegemony was over. The age of freedom had begun. The end.